So someone in the comments reached out to me recently and suggested I take a look at this Blender Guru Anvil tutorial. And truthfully, Blender Guru is a fantastic resource for VFX, and you should watch all of his stuff. His podcasts and sit-down interviews are good, his lessons are good, and truthfully, a lot of the stuff that goes on inside this Anvil tutorial is really good universal knowledge. And you should pay attention to all of it, absorb all of it. Lots of good tips, especially for beginners. Really, really, really good stuff. Having said that, somebody reached out to me in the comments and asked and basically was like, how would you go about this in a program like Zbrush? And truthfully, the way I would do it would be completely different. It would sidestep a whole lot of the lessons that this guy goes over about the, about how necessary polyflow and good modeling techniques are. And like I said, there's tons of good stuff in these videos. But sometimes you just need to make a fucking anvil like really fast. 13, 22, 18, 26, 26, 37, oh my god, all the hours and hours and hours. No. So the real question is, how quickly can you knock an anvil out in Zbrush by itself with nothing else? And I'm going to be perfectly honest, I don't know Blender. I've never touched Blender. I understand it's free. It's out there for everyone who doesn't have access to Maya or Max or any of that other stuff, but I've never had to use it. I've never been at a studio that used it. Take what you will from that. But moving forward, and that's not a knock on Blender. I'm sure it's great. Clearly, the work that the Blender Guru puts forward is all really high quality stuff, but I'm more of a 3D Studio Max and Zbrush guy myself. Also along the way, I'm going to take the opportunity to show you tons of little bitty tips and tricks about hard modeling, Dynamesh, the interface. This is basically going to be a tips and tricks guide for the most part. It's going to be a lot of little things I'm going to get into. So, alright, let's get the ball rolling. The first thing we got to do is find a picture of an anvil, and I've already done that. So this is a pretty classic looking anvil. It's just basic shapes. So let's put this aside for now. All right, so let's fire up ZBrush. I am using ZBrush 2019.1. It's the latest version. So if any differences that you come across between your interface and mine, then it's just the breaks. So upon firing up ZBrush for the first time, you can actually see one thing that kind of annoys me. Other than the fact that if you touch anything, it does that, which still starts up in 2.5D mode because fucking reasons that I can't comprehend. Say you wanted to fill in these lines. So pretty much one little bitty tip I would do to help out your user interface a little bit is to go to Documents and then take it out of Pro and then change this to 2000 by 2000 and hit resize, and then cool. So it'll kind of like fill in the borders and everything, and it's a pretty good thing. And if you want to make sure that ZBrush always starts up this way, you can just hit save as startup doc, click it one time, has been stored successfully. Whenever you launch ZBrush, you can return any plan, blah blah blah. So you'll only have to do that once, but it'll keep the borders from like being on your stuff. It's totally fine. So how do we make an anvil from nothing? Well, the first thing you want to do is come over here and look at your primitives. Now, these are the primitive objects that you have going on right here. And the first one we're going to mess with is a cube, which is oddly rounded in the image that pops up. But when you select it and it comes here and then you drag it out, and then of course, before you touch anything, you have to hit T or come up here and click Edit. Now you can orbit around it. It has straight corners. And another weird thing about a ZBrush cube is if you go over here to polyframe mode, turn it on, and you can see that the top of their cube is like dumb. I'm again sure there's a really, really smart reason why the top of their cube is not like the other sides, but alas, this is what we got, a cube. And the first thing I'm going to tell you is that you're going to need to take this object and multiply the number of sides. Now, you can't actually come over here and hit divide. It kind of messes it up. It's not a polymesh 3D, so it's just doing weird stuff. But if you come over here to a secret tab called Initialize, because that makes sense. Here, you can do all kinds of neat stuff. You can like twist the mesh around, and you can take these and you can multiply the sides like that. So now we've got tons of polygons to work with here. So the next step you're gonna do is you're gonna come up and you're gonna hit Make Polymesh 3D, which is gonna make it a basic object, and of course change it to where you can just divide it normally now. We're not gonna do any of that yet, because before we do that, we're gonna come and do the same thing to a cylinder. Now, of course, if the cylinder isn't here on the side, because you can click through here, if it's not here, you can just click it and then find the cylinder. No problem. So again, we're going to come down to Initialize, and we're going to increase the divisions in both directions till it's got a lot to work with. It's just nice and smooth, because we're going to use this to Boolean we're going to use live Boolean to subtract it from other objects, and we don't want to be able to see the polygons when we do that. We want it to be a nice smooth curve. So again, we're going to hit Make Polymesh 3D, and then you can actually see that they're right here, PM3D. It puts a little affix in front of them. So if you go to the cube and then just append the cylinder into the cube scene, now you can actually see that we have the cube and the cylinder in one scene. Now, that was kind of a lot of setup to get going, since we just needed to get a really high detail mesh cube inside of here. And the reason you have to convert them to polymeshes first is if you just straight import them into your scene, you won't be able to convert them into a polymesh at that point. You're gonna have to do it all over again. It's really stupid, really, really annoying. But it's just a little prep work to get us to this point where we have these two objects in our scene, and now we can start making our anvil. So now we have this cube, we have our two objects in the scene, let's get going. So let's take a look at this anvil, shall we? And really kind of take a look at it. And if you want to take this thing and break it down into several basic shapes, what you can see here is you've got a cone on the end, you've got a square that bleeds into the cone, you've got another square that makes up the body, and then you've got like this tapered edge. So if you think not additively, more subtractively, say this is a straight block, how would you use simple shapes to cut out these pieces? And I'm going to show you. So imagine that this is our body, and we're going to take this guy and we're going to come up to scale, or just hit E, and now this is going to give us a gizmo and it's default in the center. And of course we can scale this guy around and kind of do whatever. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch this guy out. This right here is going to end up being this body right here. Can I mirror this somehow? It'd be super dope if I could mirror this thing. Anyway, so this is going to be the body. And then, of course, we can just come over here to duplicate, or Control-Shift-D. I'm just going to hit the buttons to give you guys a clear, I don't want to use too many quick keys to like confuse you guys. I may use some, but for the most part, I'm going to click on everything and show you where it exists. So now we have two cubes, right? We're going to come back to Move, and we're going to slide the first one out. And we can scale this guy in, and then move it in like this, come to scale, and if you grab this yellow one in the middle, you can bring it down a little bit like that. And if you can see, if you look at it like this, more or less, and then bring the picture up, you can kind of see what I'm doing. Like, this little square is going to be this square right here. So we'll just keep using that logic. I'm going to duplicate this again, and I'm going to slide this one out. Now, this one I'm going to scale out a little bit, because this needs to be a cone on the end. So first question is, how do we take this cube and turn the end into a cone? Especially one that's got sort of a flat top to it. So that's a little bit specific. So what you're going to do is, with the gizmo up, you're going to come up to this little customize wheel. And when you click on that wheel, there's a deformer option. There's a whole lot of options here, and they can do all kinds of stuff. They kind of make sense. Taper, rotate, inflate. It does all kinds of stuff to it. But we're looking for deformer. So this is going to give us a little bitty deformation cage. So if you just select one of these guys, and then shift select, and then you can raise all of them up. And then we're going to zoom in select the next row, raise all of them up, and then you're going to take these. So if you just select one, it'll select it. If you select another one, it deselects it. But if you hit shift, it'll grab the others too. So you can move them in like this, and then of course grab these, move them in like this, and it doesn't have to be exact. And now what we've got is a nice little anvil end. And another neat little detail is like you have sort of like these ridges and stuff like that. Now, you know, you can put them at the top, you can put them at the bottom. I like them at the bottom. I think they're a little bit cooler. So this is what we're gonna do. That guy and that guy, and we'll raise that up. And then we'll take this middle and bring it down a bit. And I'm gonna say that looks pretty cool. Maybe bring that down a smidge. Or it still has sort of a lip at the bottom, but all right, cool. If you want to get out of this mode, you hit the gear, and now it's set to deformer, and you just go back to 3D Gizmo, and it's back to normal. So come up, hit draw, and now we have our pieces. We got 3 pieces for the main body. Now it's going to get a little bit more complicated for the lower pieces. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to come back to this one. I'm going to leave polyframe on so you know which pieces I have selected. And then we're going to hit duplicate. And then of course go back to move. And then we're going to slide this one down to about here. A little bit of overlap on the bottom, no problem. And what we're going to do now is we're going to widen it out a little bit because the bottom's pretty big and like flayed out like this all in one piece. So we're going to go back to deform again. And the same way we did it last time, we're going to grab these. We're going to pull them way out. We're going to grab these and pull them way out. And then we can grab these and pull them out. So we've got a shape that looks a lot like this. And one additional touch too is if you bring the picture back up, there's sort of a curve in kind of action going on. So what we can do is we can grab these and maybe punch that in, give it a little bit more of a neat slope, and make it a little custom. Push it in a smidge, and then come to the side and sort of do the same thing. Like that. Alrighty, go back to draw. Alright, so at this point, our scene's kind of coming together, so I'm going to save my scene. So if you've never saved before in ZBrush, this is a little tip. These are tools. It's saving all of these pieces into one file, even though it treats them sort of differently. But if you just come up here to save as underneath tool parameters, you can kind of put it wherever you want. And I'll just put it here and leave it the default name, whatever. Additionally, if you've never saved a file and then closed ZBrush and reopened it, let's close this guy. And of course it will ask you every time to save before you close, but just it's fine. And then let's bring him back up. This, and you'd come over here to tool, you'd go load tool, desktop, find the cube, hit OK. If you hold shift, it'll snap it, and then you let go after you drag out, and before you hit anything, hit edit or T, and now you can move your object around like you always have been able to. So our anvil still isn't quite looking like an anvil yet, but it's getting real close. So here's where we're going to get a little crazy with how this stuff is put together. Boolean or live Boolean is a pretty important part of sort of hard surface modeling in general. It can help you make really awesome shapes, lots of combining, lots of cutting objects out of one another. So if you're thinking of carving away at an object like this, there's a few things you're gonna have to do. One, I recommend collapsing all the objects down. So if we go to, how you collapse them down is if you come down here in the stack and you go to merge, and if you hit merge visible, it'll collapse everything. Of course, everything is visible except for our cylinder, but I'll get to that piece. Or you can do them one at a time. If you hit merge down, it'll ask you, this is not an undoable, blah, blah, blah. Just hit OK. Merge down every time. Merge down. Merge down. Cool. Now we have our object. And one additional thing is if we turn polyframe back on, all the original polyframe setups are still here. But if you have one like this, and say you want to separate the polyframe of this cube from this object, one neat way to do it is to hold Control and Shift, and you're going to get a green thing, and this will allow you to separate polygons away. So if you just grab that much of this object, since the objects aren't connected by any geo, you can come down to visibility and hit grow and just keep hitting it. Eventually it'll grab the entire object. Man, it's a lot of polygons. Cool. So you got the entire object, and now you can select it, and if you hit Control W, it assigns a polygroup to it. And if you hit Control Shift, click anywhere, it will bring them all back, and now all of the pieces are in separate polygroups. That's really, really handy for what's going to come next. The good thing about this is now we can control this on an individual level, but it's still all one object. But I accidentally put the cylinder inside the thing. Oop. And I'm going to need that cylinder, so let's fix a mistake, shall we? I'm going to have to remove that cylinder. How do you do it? Well, since they're all polygroups, it's really easy. You just come over here to duplicate, hide the one below, select this one. All right, so we can remove this guy, and then we're going to go to Geometry, Modify Topology, and we're going to hit Delete Hidden. Now, I can't bring it back, so if we grab this guy, right, now we got just our cylinder, underneath Modify Topology, Delete Hidden, and now we just have our cylinder. It's off by itself again, no harm, no foul. Moving forward, we're going to get to one of the more complicated parts of this guy, and that is this back curve, because this back curve, of course, is much higher up than this front curve, so our slopes here are going to be different, and the way I'm going to achieve this is through a Boolean operation. You can come over here and grab your layers. I'm going to move this one to the top just to make it easier to understand. The first thing you need to do to make an object able to be Booleaned is to click this little start icon right here, and then if you come down to the object that you want to subtract from it, you select this right here. It's a little half moon. And at that point, when you turn on live Boolean, it should subtract one from the other. Now, they're not on top of one another, but if I come up to here and I pump this guy up, and I move this over, now you can see what it's going to do right there. It's going to give me a nice clean one. If I turn this off, you're going to see it's going to be just perfect. I turn polyframe back on so we can see what we're working with. I can come back to my cylinder, and I'm going to go rotate, and I'm going to put him on its side. Hold Shift and it will snap. And then I'm going to line him up as best I can, and this is annoying me. Also, if your anchor point is ever off like this and it just gets annoying, hit the unlock button and then you can move it back to the center, or actually you can just hit home. The home is of the world, and this second one is to mesh center, so then you can turn it off. So now we're back in the center of the object. It's really easy. So we're gonna scale this guy around a little bit, and we're gonna move him down, and we're gonna scale him out, and then we're gonna start moving him. So let's take a look at what our end result is going to be as opposed to seeing the rest of that stuff. So, all right, now we're looking at something a little bit like this, which is close, but not really close enough. So let's move it in a bit more, and that's getting a lot better. Now we can still do neat stuff. Like if you come here and you're looking at your shape, you can grab this and move it out like that. All right, and then we'll turn him off. Turn that off. Sorry, turn that back on. Cool. That's looking a lot better. So let's do a little bit more work. something, something maybe like this. Get the flat on top, doesn't matter in the middle. All right, cool. And you can come back to this shape. You can do stuff like this. You can grab this. Right now, we're not going to worry about these polygons. We're not worrying about that stuff at all at this point. So we're just going to drag this out and give us a little bit more depth in the middle. Unmask it. Turn the polyframe off. Take a look at our guy, and that's not bad. Not bad at all. So let me do one more thing. Something like that. Yeah, cool. So now we've got this, and now we're at the point where we do actually want to bring in another object. I'm going to need an additional cylinder to cut out of these sides. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to come to the cylinder here that I believe isn't affecting anything. And I'm going to rotate him vertical, 90 degrees, turn it to the side, something like that. And then move it in like that. And at that point, I can turn it into a Boolean operation, and now you can see what we're really doing here. Cool. So we can move that in. Right up to the edge, make it look really nice. Sweet. Cool. All right, well, it's gonna be this. We'll go with that. It's close enough. And just drag it out a little bit. Okay, cool. And so, say we're gonna be happy with that. I don't know, man, whatever. Say you're gonna be happy with that. So now you're gonna come to this object, and the idea is to collapse this guy down into a single mesh so we don't have to really worry about any more of that stuff. Actually, one more thing I'm gonna do before we do that part is I'm going to flatten out these corners much like these. So let's do that right now. So we can actually do this with a brush. So when you come over here and grab the clip curve brush, it'll tell you right here, the brush will be selected, active brush, press Control Shift keys, and then click to use it. Hit OK. So you hit Control and Shift, and now you're going to get this line. And the line will snap around, which is nice and good, but it gives you a gradient on one side of the dotted line. And anything on the other side of that gradient is going to get flattened out. So just keep in mind that if you mask this stuff and invert it so it doesn't affect the top, what you can do is you can control and shift. Whoops, gradients on the other side. Bam. You flatten that guy out. And it will give you these like overhangs. So there is sort of a method to the madness, unfortunately. So if you come over here, something like that. And then we're going to go something like that. And then maybe something like, oops, something like that. Boy, I do not know why you're doing that. Okay, so we have a new problem, right? So when I come here with the clip curve brush and I smash that down, it gives me a weird error. So since we're Booleaning, what we're gonna do is we're gonna Boolean this too. So we're gonna grab a cube, no problem. We're gonna switch it to Boolean. We're going to move the cube down. And again, see what we're dealing with. Scale it up. Come out like this. Stretch it out. Flip it and reverse it. Bring it in like that. Turn this off. All right, cool. So we're not going to have the problem now. And of course, we can duplicate this object again. And we don't even need to rotate it. We can just move it up. Make it a Boolean. that. Now we're gonna duplicate, make it a Boolean, move it to the back. Well, that's all looking nice. And I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and try to collapse this guy down and see if it gives us an error of any kind. So before we do that, let's go to save. And of course, we'll do a version 2. And then the way to do this is to come up to here and select the object. And if you come down in the stack to Boolean, right now you can just ask it, make Boolean mesh, bam. And assuming that there are no errors that happened, it should make the object. And it did not have any errors, and here is our object. Cool. So it's all looking pretty good. It's still in pieces though, so you see. And what we can do here is we can go to move, and since it's still in the center of the object, and this is the Z-axis to the side, we can go to geometry and we can go to modify topology. We can take our mirror and weld, switch it to Z, click that button, and now we have an anvil. Now, upon closer inspection, I noticed that there is a square hole in the back of here. So of course, adding that can be really easy at this point because we're gonna do it the same way we did all the other things. We're gonna come to our object over here in subtool. We're gonna hit append. We're gonna bring in a cube. We're gonna slide the cube down a little bit. We're going to scale it down a fair bit, and then we're gonna bring it up until it's intersecting with the object. Nice and clean. Maybe just line it back a little bit. I don't know, man. I can't get too anal about it. And then, of course, make that a Boolean. Turn that on. Bam. And now it's punching that out. So at this point, this object is looking like pretty legit as far as, you know, a seamless thing. And of course, to collapse it down, come down to Boolean, make a Boolean mesh. Of course, if it gave you no errors, it should pop up right here. It is, of course, right here. So now we will save this. It's version 3. So we have our thing, but one thing to keep in mind is it is still in pieces, and you know, I mean, you could just do so much more with it, right? Say you want to connect all these disparate pieces, which is kind of tricky, right? These objects aren't really connected in any way. They're just kind of like punched out of one another. So in order to connect all this stuff, all you got to do is come down and make it a Dynamesh. So if we go to Dynamesh, I can show you a little bit about this, right? So if we look at our polyframes, we can see that every single surface on this thing is its own polyframe, because as we were building it, as we were punching it out of itself, it was just all looking pretty good. We got some intersection going on right here, but we'll see how that turns out, truthfully. Or even maybe I can just select it like this. Maybe that'll clean it up, who knows? But in order to clean a lot of this up and help out a lot, we can turn on polish, we can turn on groups, and if you hold control over a menu, it'll tell you right here, is help you split any mesh. Maybe not groups. Groups will split the mesh, but under here in polish, each tool in the palette, blah, 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 blah. Well, let's see. It'll sharpen up the edges. And this right here, and project, if you turn on polish and project, it'll help preserve a lot of edges on objects like this. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn this off, and I'm gonna show you what it's gonna do at the base default resolution. Cool, so it did it. And now if you look at our polyframe, check this out, right? Like it just totally worked this thing. All that chatter, all that nonsense at the top, totally fixed. So now that we've gotten it this far, we have our fully done crisp anvil with poly groups and the whole 9 yards. But we're running a few too many polygons, and of course we could get in there and like clean up little areas like this and stuff. I mean, I'm not gonna worry about it, but you can get in there and clean up those areas and repolygroup it a little bit. But so I just want to cut down the polygons a little bit, and I'm going to come over to Dynamesh again. I'm going to turn on polish. I'm going to turn on project. I'm going to turn the blur down, and I'm going to change this to about 50 to cut down on the number of polygons, because we got a whole lot in here. And just go ahead and hit that, and it should take a second. Bam. Sweet. And mind you, these are not perfect. You can get in there and like make them perfect, but the beautiful thing about an anvil is its edges are rough anyway, so no one's gonna know. So we can turn polyframe off and just look at the model as is, and it's pretty solid. Like, no one's gonna complain about an anvil that's sitting in a corner that's this far away. But since we're doing it, let's turn the polyframes back on, and now, since everything is like pretty broad on all sides, this should work really easy in UV Master. So let's come down to Z plugin, UV Master, turn on symmetry, turn on polygroups because it'll read all these things, damn it, and then hit unwrap. Sweet, well, I think that worked, so let's find out. We can come down to texture map. First UV map, we'll make it 4K, we'll come down to texture and we'll hit new from polypaint. We can see that right there, and if we really want to check it, we can come to UV and hit morph UV, and we can see that it's close enough, man. So this is probably gonna work. Hit morph UV again, comes back together, and now we have a reasonably dense starting piece of geo that is fully UV mapped and ready for, you know, subdivision and additional detail. So at this point now we can just divide a couple of times, turn polyframe off, and now we can treat it like any other thing. Actually, if I hit X, I can actually switch the axis to the other side, but instead of doing that, I'm just gonna take this guy and rotate him around, and now yeah, okay, cool, that fixes it. So now I can get in here and I can just go crazy on these edges. Shoot, I don't even need it to be that high. All right, cool. Get in here and just kind of soften these edges out. And let's throw a material on here that's a little bit more fitting. Maybe some brushed metal, some straight metal, dark metal. Yeah, we'll see how this feels after a little bit. But all right, let's just get in here and start doing our thing now. Because from this point on, this entire process is going to be nothing but standard ZBrush modeling techniques. Let's actually get it off something that's shiny so I can see a little bit more what I'm doing. And I'm just doing this with a mouse, and of course a mouse is much different than using a tablet or some kind of pen on ZBrush. The pressure sensitivities of the tools and stuff tend to not work very well with a mouse. So that's something to keep in mind when you're doing any kind of sculpting, especially on the go. Like, you just will never be able to get the right level of detail with only a mouse. Yeah, so I can come down into here and say we want to like get a little bit of this. All right, and one brush that I could recommend for this, if you come over, if I like to default over in my user interface with these two tabs up here, it gives me more tool options across the bottom, but not to get too scary. Bring this up, and I know it's insane, but you can limit, if you know the name of the tool you're looking for, just hit the letter and it will, like C, I'm looking for clay tubes, and it gets rid of anything that doesn't begin with a C. So click on this, and now I'll get a really small brush and, oh crap, and then lower the intensity, and then just start that wear and tear process. And this isn't exactly like a science. You can kind of get in there and, you know, do whatever you want. There is sort of a rule of happy accidents and allowing kind of the tools to do the job for you. I know that sounds very Bob Ross-esque, but I assure you everything that man ever taught was 100% true, and you should watch his stream all the time because it's very educational and he is just a pleasure. And so we can get in here a little bit more. The beautiful thing is now you can fly around a little bit because we threw down a fair amount of polygons that was bogging the scene down, and I probably should have done that from the beginning, but I knew I could do it at any time pretty much. I just carried on. And we're just gonna keep doing this for the time being. All right, So now I have a fair amount of wear and tear all over this guy, and of course you can keep going as much as you want, but the next thing I'm going to do is see if I can procedurally sort of take care of this problem for me. Of course you can get into the world of stamps and alphas and sort of paint in all the micro detail that you would see in sort of an object like this. I mean, you could get all the way in there and just go crazy with just grungy bump maps and all kinds of stuff. But you know, we're just kind of showing you the broad strokes. But I'll tell you, one way that you can fill a lot of detail onto a surface like this is, as long as you got enough polygons going on, you can come down to surface and you can click on Lightbox Noisemakers. So inside here you get all kinds of presets, stuff that can roughen up the surface of this object sort of automatically for you, and there are tons and tons of options that are really, really cool. And some of these, depending on what you're trying to do, I mean, like, you can get real close with not a lot of effort. So as long as you find one that you think is kind of close, so I'm going to go real subtle in the beginning and just kind of lay down, you know, a real subtle kind of like bumpiness to it, much like this, you know, it's like just got this roughness sort of all over it. So I'm just going to lay something down real quick. So let's minimize that. And if you open up edit under noise, because this isn't actually on there yet, it's just sort of giving you an approximation of what it's going to look like. And if you turn this off, it'll go away. Now that you've got it on here, you can hit edit. And inside here, you can play around with the parameters of this noise even more and really kind of like dial in the look of what you're going for. So you can get something that's just like this and sort of play around with this strength. And of course, there's no guarantee that this is going to look like it on the model. The way this looks is dependent on the amount of polygons you have. So I'll say, all right, bam, that looks good to me. Sure, whatever, right? Just base coat. And now you're going to hit apply to mesh. And you can see right here, truthfully, it's pretty good. So now, I mean, this is where we're at. We've got it nice and bumpy, and it's got some wear and tear on the edges. And all you got to do is come into here and find some sort of material that looks vaguely metallic to prove that I'm not a charlatan. All right, so now we got this metal guy on here. And at this point, what we can start doing is, I mean, you can go any sort of direction, right? Like you can start painting onto this guy wear and tear and all kinds of stuff, and, you know, add another layer of subdivision. So now when we go into surface again, we'll go to this, and then we'll find something like this, and that may be a bit much. Also much. Well, I mean, you know, sometimes it needs to be like that. All right, well, that's not bad. So let's see if we can actually modify this into something we can use. All right. Okay. Cool. All right, so let's hit that. And all right, so it's got a little bit more denty action kind of going on. And let's just apply it to the mesh. Cool. And then let's just do another one for giggles. Another base coat. And hit apply to mesh. So at this point, bam, you can see what kind of surface we're dealing with now. It's like good and metal. This is a little bit chromy and sort of shining around and everything, but I can assure you it'll look really good in a bump map. So, so now you can just look at stuff like this and kind of get a sense of just throwing a bunch of procedural noise maps can give you some really, really fine detail inside there. And of course, like, you can lay down color and whatever, but of course, you come down to texture map, go to new from poly paint, which is totally fine. And then if you want to create displacement maps, you can come down to the first level of subdivision, come to here, and then go to, let's bring that up to 1, and we'll do 32-bit, and we'll create a displacement map. So now you've got a really nice displacement map to go on the lowest level polygon version of this guy, which is, I mean, still pretty, it's 100,000 polygons. I mean, you can bring it down even, I mean, seriously, you can bring it down to its lowest subdivision level, which is this right here, which will look like this, which, I mean, that's way more polygons than you'll need, and truthfully, you can get in there and retop it even more, play around with the Dynamesh settings even more, use the Z-remesher even more. You can keep getting it down, so if they give you a number that you have to hit, you can certainly hit it based off of what you have here. You can always just go to any 3D package that you're comfortable with and like reduce the polygons, or just keep doing it inside here. You can just keep going with this methodology, but that's how you make an anvil in ZBrush. It's really easy once you get going. And as a matter of fact, this is a pretty good way to make a lot of really complicated interlocking shapes, mechanical pieces, having a good strong, I mean, I just made this entire object out of 2 cubes and a cylinder. That's a way of thinking about it in the long term. If I say that's one takeaway you could have from this whole thing, is that if you think of a metal shape like a box and then subtract away complex pieces to get the grooves and cuts you want, instead of starting with a box and then building outward, start as a big box and build inward, carve away at the object, sort of like a marble slab. Booleans inside other pieces of software are generally really unpredictable and can mess up meshes a whole lot, but they work really well inside ZBrush, and I highly recommend using them to make really complex shapes. So I hope I didn't lose anyone with this tutorial. If anyone has any questions, please shout out in the comments. If I missed anything, shout that out too, and let me know. But, you know, like, the Blender Guru Anvil tutorial series is essential. You should pay attention to every word he has to say. Sometimes if you just need a fucking anvil and you got 30 minutes, you can make it happen. You can make it happen in 10 minutes if you understand the process really, really well. So, yeah, anyway, that's all I got for you today, and take care, and I'll be back for more, hopefully sooner than later. All right, peace out. Bye.